So this is the Communist Party morning scar, Tuesday the 18th of August 2020. This is the Tuesday edition, and this is the Monday edition. And Tuesdays, Fleet Street, so they are all about the fiasco and the shambles. And the target is, of course, Gavin Williamson, the so-called Secretary of State for Education. And the Times, Tuesday, the 18th of August, is talking about the universities trying to adjust to the U-turn and the need for the students to get the places that they were allocated before the downgrades. And again, the Daily Mail is being protective about Boris Johnson. It's not evidence of his unfitness and his failure, but it's a mess which could be easily corrected. That is the kind, protective shielding of Boris Johnson. And the newspaper, again, shielding Boris Johnson, and is focusing the frustration of the pupils and the parents and the schools in the direction of Gavin Williamson, Frank Spencer. And The Guardian too is refusing to name Boris Johnson, and so therefore he's not being identified as the embodiment and failure of the actual downgrading, that is the policy of the antisocial, class-based, mainly also race-based downgrade that he said was robust and was absolutely perfect. Knowing that, The Guardian is still refusing to name him and link him with the defense of the downgrade. And the Financial Times uses the word latest government U-turn, but no naming of Johnson. The Metro, which is a London-based morning equivalent of the so-called Evening No Standard, too is not naming Johnson as the embodiment of the failure. and the incompetence, dysfunction. And of course, Boris Graf is running the enlarged picture of Frank Spencer. Some others do have them, and not Boris Johnson. Because the evidence is that Boris Johnson stood in front of cameras and boasted that the downgrade was perfectly acceptable and correct and was proof of the robust system, quote, we have in place. And again, the Sun is talking about the farce, not Boris Johnson failing. Incredible, isn't it, that there is no mention of Boris Johnson anywhere. Imagine if Corbyn had done anything 1/10 as bad as this. They would have declared war on this traitor, Boris Johnson. They are not declaring war on Boris Johnson, but they would have declared war on Jeremy Corbyn. And the inside pages of the Sun too has said that it's the focus is on Gavin Williamson. Gavin Williamson is as guilty of incompetence, negligence, and robbery of the rights of the state school children as Boris Johnson. So there is this agenda, active agenda, right across the Fleet Street papers, including The Guardian, to shield the name and the image of Boris Johnson from the absolutely overdue criticism over his downgrading role, his downgrading policy, his downgrading regime. We shall be talking more about the continuing shielding of Boris Johnson by Fleet Street later in the diagnosis of the papers of Wednesday, the 19th of August, 2020. 19th of August is also declared a humanitarian or human rights day by the United Nations, and we shall be talking about that in the context of what is happening in Britain and what Boris Johnson does to defy the duties owed to people based on the United Nations charters and declarations and treaties. And the fact that the entirety of Fleet Street, that is London-based main newspapers, is sparing Boris Johnson any naming, let alone shaming, about the robbery of the children's grades based on the children's postcode, on the basic ordinary background, and based on the fact that they are not from the wealthy families whose children go to the oddly named, oddly designated, oddly tagged public schools, which are really private schools. And Boris Johnson went to private school, or schools as happened, because of the various postings of his father during Boris Johnson's time as a school pupil or schoolboy. And he went to, of course, the Eton School, which incidentally was the only, quote, private school or public school that actually went to the records and said that the downgrading was affecting its own pupils, which is odd and significant. We shall be taking a detailed look about how that came to be, because all the evidence showed that the downgrading did not affect the private schools, that is, public schools, and that Eton became the only one that went on the record to say that its students were affected as well. That oddity should be identified and explained, and we should be looking at the evidence in a later edition. Now, today's newspapers, that is the Tuesday, 18th of August 2020 newspapers, have not been running anything about the migrants from France, Calais to England, in anything like the huge headlines that they were running for the 10 days beforehand, before the downgrading of the students' grades hit the headlines. And we are going to talk about the reason why that happened, because as far as we are concerned, the United Nations Human Rights Council or Human Rights Commission has not taken any legal action against the UK government for the hysteric racist scaremongering campaign that it conducted, fronted by Boris Johnson, who started his campaign against the migrants in a speech in Essex Monday before last, and he was imitated, echoed, and peddled and reported to the extent that it was like a war he had declared. The reporting was by the BBC morning program, breakfast program, and on Tuesday of last week, not yesterday, Tuesday of last week, the Sky News, which is the second biggest kind of outlet on Sky satellite television, did actually the same thing on its K-Barley slot, imitating the BBC and hyping up hysteria at the expense of the migrants. And even they couldn't find migrants numbering more than 20 at most when they chased a migrant's dinghy and tried to have a conversation with them. How they could do that is beyond all reasonable kind of considerations, because you cannot have a conversation from a boat to a dinghy in open sea. There is too much noise and too much kind of instability in both vehicles. So, but that staged that attempt at conversation, thus showing the contempt the Sky News showed to the migrants. The migrants were not some kind of entertainers trying to stage a farcical kind of joke event. They were actually desperate people trying to escape desperate situations back home and back in the last place which they passed, which is France. So we shall be looking at the reason why the United Nations agency has not taken any legal action against the UK, and the press releases issued by the United Nations are, as we said in previous editions, very timid and very restrictive, and they don't actually tell the full facts about the extent of the hysteria created by Boris Johnson, imitated by Priti Patel, with the collusion of their proxy, Kent County Council. And the reason we believe is because they don't have the desperate urgency in their minds, the people who lead the United Nations Commission, the desperation that is felt by the refugees, by the victims of racism, is not the desperation that the people who run these bureaucratic organizations feel in their minds. So that is the difference. And all of this is about the agenda of creating and perpetuating hunger and poverty and famine in the countries of origin. So we have started a process whereby we have served notice on the Kent County Council and have publicly confirmed the inclusion of Priti Patel, the Home Secretary at the Home Office, as defendants in a list of about 10 separate defendants in a legal action that we shall be supporting against the racist hysteria and the breaches, widespread breaches of the United Nations charters and the 1951 Refugee Convention by Britain. And we believe that that is the reason why the Fleet Street and the government have not been making similar outrageous, outlandish claims in the days since we issued the actual declaration and issued the intention, the notice that legal action would be taken against them. Back to the place where we are actually mainly concerned about, the Brick Lane, East London. The Khoodeelaar campaign is in defense. It exists and it was founded to defend the community in the East End of London. And the East End of London symbolized, represented by Brick Lane. And the Tower Hamlets Council has declared that Brick Lane, the traffic through Brick Lane would be stopped to enable some restaurants to do business by putting out chairs on the main road and blocking the main road and the traffic for 10 weeks. We shall be talking about that at length in the next edition, and we shall be updating on the overall role of Tower Hamlets Council in detail in separate bulletins that will be coming later this morning.